What a whirlwind it must be to be a WWE superstar. You show up the arena, never quite knowing what little storyline they'll have cooked up for you. Sometimes it's something awesome like the Mega Powers exploding, the Yes Movement, the Bloodline, and sometimes they have you pretending to make love to a mannequin in a funeral home. Fun! With all the crazy things that are asked of these talents, there are sure to be some moments that they aren't particularly fond of. I'm Singer Siete for 7 Wrestling, and let's take a look at the 7 storylines that WWE stars regret doing. Now, before we get into this, we appreciate your support, so if you enjoy this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and rock bottom that notification bell. Number 1. Steve Austin. Every mega good guy eventually has to deal with the fans turning against him. It happened to the Hulkster when Hogan tried to cheat and pull Sid Justice out of the 1992 Royal Rumble. It happened to The Rock at SummerSlam 2002 when the next big thing, Brock Lesnar, roughed him up. It happened to John Cena. Well, it was literally always happening to John Cena. They even made a shirt. So it made sense that Steve Austin would see the tide turning on his fandom in the build-up to WrestleMania X7, excuse me. In the build-up to his title match, the Texas Rattlesnake would cut slightly unhinged promos declaring how much he needed the WWE Championship and how he'd do anything to get it. Therefore, it wasn't that odd in hindsight when he'd be willing to partner up with his most hated rival, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, in order to claim his 5th World Championship. But there were a few problems. First of all, the match took place in the Astrodome in Houston, Texas. That's Stone Cold country. Even as the turncoat toasted beers with the most hated man in the industry, they all cheered. No problem, they'll just partner him up with the hated Triple H. Huh? Still cheered. Fine, have him beat up the beloved Hardy Boys. Oh, still cheered. Alright, last resort. Beat up Lita, the most popular woman in the company, with a chair. Nope, still didn't work. And wow, look at that pedigree. That might be the best one we've ever seen. Go Lita. At any rate, the fans just didn't want to boo Austin. He'd go on to say on the Talk is Jericho podcast, worst call I've ever made other than refusing to job the Brock Lesnar in Atlanta. But you know, that was my idea. Vince always likes to do something big at WrestleMania. He didn't have anything big planned, so me being the rocket scientist that I am, I figured, okay, you're a hot babyface, and if you turn heel, you're a hot-ass heel. Well, certainly the time wasn't right for me to turn. It was like everybody loved John Wayne for what he stood for, and so he did not ever have to be the bad guy in the movies. He never was. People didn't want to hate me. They would double down on the heel turn by having Austin join WCW, but by the time the winter rolled around, they stopped fighting against the tide and just turned Austin back into a good guy again. Number 2. Mick Foley. On the September 27th, 1999 episode of Monday Night Raw, Mick Foley hosted the This Is Your Life segment for his tag team partner, The Rock. Foley would introduce several people from The Rock's past, and one by one, the Great One would tear into them and send them packing. It was silly. It went on for way longer than Vince McMahon wanted it to, and it produced some of the highest ratings in professional wrestling history. We're talking about an 8.4. Compare that with more recent Raws, which are around a 1.5, and yeah, more competition today, cord cutting, no streaming back then, yada yada yada. But 8.4 is still an insane number for a comedy segment, especially one featuring Yerpel the frickin' clown. They've tried to revive this concept over the years with The Rock returning the favor and doing Mick Foley, This Is Your Life. Alexa Bliss hosted a This Is Your Life for Bayley, and they've just never been able to recapture the magic. Such is the case when Mick Foley made his first appearance back in the WWE after a 3-year absence to host a This Is Your Life segment for John Cena. And it was bad. They kicked things off with a musical segment featuring a naked John Cena, which we wouldn't see that again until the 2024 Academy Awards. From there, Foley would bring out John's Little League Baseball coach, who would tell a story about how John Cena struck out to lose a game. Bull Buchanan would come out to tell John how he ruined his life. And then John Cena's actual father would come out to prove that wrestling promo talent isn't hereditary. Jerry Lawler would sum it up pretty succinctly saying, if this is John's life, it's a rotten one. It didn't make sense. Cena was cringing the whole time, and the big climactic finale was The Rock coming out and dropping Foley with a rock bottom, putting him, and us, out of our misery. Foley would later say on Facebook, I absolutely knew there was no way in my first appearance on WWE TV in 3 years that I should have agreed to be a part of This Is Your Life, John Cena. Every bone in my body told me that being part of it was a bad idea, but after 3 years away, I didn't want to rock the boat. You should have rocked it, Mick. Number 3, Jake Roberts. It's interesting how often WWE and WCW have taken someone's behind-the-scenes substance abuse problems and turned them into an angle because it's never been successful once. When Road Warrior Hawk's problems got him kicked out of the Legion of Doom and ended up with him kinda sorta but not really jumping off the Titantron, it didn't do anything positive for anyone involved. And when Scott Hall would show up to Nitro in condition unable to compete, it didn't do anything positive for anyone involved. And when the WWE decided to use Jake Roberts overcoming his demons in an angle, it was just sad. These are all just sad, really. In Jake's case, Jerry, the king of big pervy Uncle Energy Lawler, was harassing him about his past alcohol abuse. This all came to a head at SummerSlam 96, where Lawler would best Roberts by cracking him over the head with a bottle of Jim Beam. Years later, on the Grind City Wrestling podcast, Roberts would go on to say, that's one of the things I wish I'd never done. The whole idea behind that was really cheap. I thought it was disgusting, actually. After everything I've been through, you're going to go out there and bring that out to the front, and that's going to be your idea? That's the best the writers can come up with? Come on, give me a break. It was ridiculous. Not many times in my career that I said no, but that's one time I should have said no. Number 4, Shelton Benjamin. Several racially charged moments have been removed from the WWE Network. Degeneration X's blackface impression of the Nation of Domination? Gone. Vince McMahon dropping the N-word without the hard R in front of Booker T and Sharmell? Gone. But one moment that still exists is from the June 30th, 2009 episode of ECW. It was the debut match for the Japanese superstar Yoshitatsu, and he was scheduled to square off against one of the WWE's most gifted athletes, Shelton Benjamin. And before the bout, Shelton Benjamin kicked things off by making fun of Yoshi's name. It'd get worse from there as Shelton would impersonate a stereotypical Japanese accent and talk trash towards Yoshi, even threatening to call Godzilla. From there, Shelton would bow to the referee in all 4 corners of the ring. Then he'd strike the crane kick pose from the Karate Kid, he'd do a sumo pose, and finally a bow towards Tatsu himself. Yoshi would take this opportunity to kick Shelton in the head and pick up the 3 count, so at least the heel would receive immediate comeuppance. And as we said before, we know that heels need to do and say bad things to get us to boo them, but racism is so much worse than, your local sports team sucks on the chart of tired, cheap heat tactics. Benjamin, to his credit, would state that this moment is the one he regrets the most in his career. He'd say on Twitter or X or whatever, if I could erase one thing in my career, this is it. I'm completely and utterly disgusted by this racist shit. I'm glad the ending was my character getting kicked in the head and losing. #racism sucks. Number 5, Shawn Michaels. In their mega hit Poison, Belle Biv DeVoe was quoted as saying, "Never trust a big butt and a smile." Other things to add to that list of things to never trust are politicians, turn signals, and pro wrestler retirements, because unless there is a legitimate medical reason for them hanging up the boots, they'll probably be back. Ric Flair retired like a dozen times, Terry Funk, Mick Foley, Roddy Piper, the list goes on, but every rule has an exception, and the exception to this rule used to be Shawn Michaels. Arguably the best in-ring talent of his generation, Michaels took an extended hiatus in 1998 due to a back injury. He'd come back in 2002 for a barn burner of a match against Triple H, and because it went so well, stuck around for another 8 years. And amazingly, the second run is arguably better than the first one. Shawn knew his time as a top-tier in-ring competitor was coming to a close, so he put on an all-time classic when he lost to The Undertaker in a career versus streak match at WrestleMania 26. Over the years, Shawn would occasionally get involved in in-ring action, such as when he refereed The Undertaker versus Triple H Hell in a Cell match at WrestleMania 28. Ooh, end of an era. or when he came back in full gear to take out the League of Nations at WrestleMania 32. But try as they might, they could never lure Mr. WrestleMania back into the ring. That is until Crown Jewel 2018, where he would team up with his DX buddy Triple H against the Brothers of Destruction, Kane and The Undertaker. To say this was a disappointment would be an understatement, seeing as we'd seen him face Kane and Undertaker several times before, and most of us have been dreaming about a match between Michaels and Brock Lesnar or AJ Styles or Seth Rollins, but at least the match was terrible. Honestly, you'd be hard-pressed to find a worse 3-match streak in WWE history than the tail end of this show. Lesnar won the vacant Universal title over Braun Strowman in less than 2 minutes. Shane McMahon subbed into the finals of the WWE World Cup and beat Dolph Ziggler in less than 3 minutes. Then DX and the Brothers of Destruction would go on to stink up the joint. Maybe it was because they were older. Maybe it was because Triple H pulled out his favorite tag team spot, that being tearing a major muscle. But when the most entertaining thing about the match is when Kane's mask and wig fall off, you're in trouble. By the time Triple H hit Kane with the opposite of the Lita pedigree from earlier, it's pretty safe to say that Shawn Michaels was regretting his decision. And yeah, we're going to give Triple H a pass on that pedigree because he reportedly tore his pectoral muscle in the match. But it was definitely a horrific match. Michaels would say that he didn't do the match for money, which I want to believe, but come on. He'd also say that he felt bad because he knew The Undertaker was looking for a great match to retire on, and this certainly wasn't that. Yes, Shawn, we all felt bad. End of an era indeed. Number 6, Lita. Edge's gimmick was already that of a slimeball bad guy when word had leaked that he had been given the old downward spiral to his good friend's girlfriend, so it pretty much just enhanced his already scummy gimmick. But his good friend's girlfriend, you probably know where I'm going with this, she was arguably the most popular female in the company and takes quite a pedigree, talking about Lita, and when word got out, it became impossible to not turn her heel, and she hated it. On Renee Paquette's Oral Sessions podcast, Lita would say, I almost quit a month into the whole love triangle. At that point, not only was it so hard, it was out of shame, like I wasn't proud of how I conducted myself. Yes, if I had to do it all over again, I absolutely would have handled myself differently, but I didn't. So I was like, make the bed, you lie in it, and at that point I was just like, I deserve all of these terrible things that everybody's saying about me. But things seemed to reach a peak when Vince McMahon pitched a live sex celebration that would take place on Raw. Now, during the segment to celebrate Edge winning the WWE title from John Cena, Edge and Lita would strip down and simulate intercourse in a bed, in the ring, under a cover, in front of a live audience. Years later on her Twitch stream, Lita would claim that she was against doing the segment, but that she was threatened with having her contract terminated if she didn't participate. Apparently Edge, John Cena, and several members of the backstage crew pushed back against the segment as well, but Vince was determined to make it happen, which isn't surprising because, you know. Number 7, Kurt Angle. There are several things we won't miss about Vince McMahon's time running the biggest wrestling company in the world. For example, his weird hatred of the word wrestling, the way angles and pushes would start and stop for no sane reason, and the way he'd occasionally book things as like an inside joke or a rib. One such example was when he had Kurt Angle stalk Booker T's wife Sharmell because Vince was convinced that Kurt Angle had a fetish for African American women. On his Kurt Angle podcast, Kurt would say, Vince is kind of a ribber. He'll do stuff to mess with you a little bit, to shove it in your face. He thought I had this fetish for black women. I like all women. White, black, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. My wife is half Hispanic, half Italian, so I think Vince thought I had this fetish for black women, and he thought it'd be a funny program, and I was not comfortable with it by any means. So yes, an incredibly dumb reason for a feud, but don't worry, it gets way worse from there. On screen, Kurt would describe his lust for Sharmell by saying he wanted to have bestiality sex with her. And yes, that line came directly from Vince McMahon. Regarding the storyline, Kurt would go on to say, I totally regret it. I didn't want any part of it. Even though I got to wrestle Booker, I'd rather not wrestle Booker than do what I had to do with Sharmell. I have so much respect for Booker T and Sharmell. I love them dearly. To have to do this program with them was completely brutal for me. Well, in all fairness to Kurt, it was brutal for anybody who had to watch it. Well, there's our list. Did we forget any other storylines that WWE stars regret doing? If so, please leave them in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drag and run to that notification bell. Until next time, I'm Singer Siete for 7 Wrestling saying, bye-bye.